All right. Hello, everyone. I see people starting to join and the participants. Welcome, everyone. As everyone starts coming in here, we'll just give everybody a minute or so to jump in. And we'll get started on our Connecting People and Teams webinar today. All right. Well, welcome for those who are here. We have over 30 people already joining and it's keeping going up. All right. So as everybody's joining, welcome. We're excited to jump into this webinar today on connecting people and teams. We are going to walk through and talk through how to build relationships with Axero, build stronger relationships with Axero, and increase the efficiency across your organization with Axero's automated org chart, our profiles, our people directory. So we're going to go ahead and let's go ahead and jump in and get started. We're a minute past here, so we'll make the most of our time today as we dive in. So we're going to be learning about building connected teams with some of the tools that Axero has. So for all of you who don't know, I'm Nicole Miller. So pleasure to meet all of you virtually, and thank you for joining us today. I'm going to host our session and walk through some more details about Axero, as well as some Q&A at the end. I'm a senior manager here with Axero with our enterprise sales team. I physically am in San Diego, so feel free to drop in the chat where you all are calling in from today. I'm in sunny San Diego, even though it's overcast today. And then we also have our wonderful product manager, Bryce, joining us today. And Bryce has been with the organization for over 11 years in different areas of business. And he is going to be taking us through the actual presentation today as we dive in. You are in wonderful hands with Bryce. He knows Axero inside and out, and specifically about the team building and value that these capabilities create. So we're going to have a fearless leader in here taking us through today. So I'm going to bring this into a full screen so everyone can see this slide. We'll take everyone through this. So I went through a little bit more about Bryce and I here. So you have a face to a name and a voice as you hear us talking today. We both have been with Axero for quite some years, so we've been around the block here. So as today's agenda, what we're going to dive into today is I'll share a little bit more about Axero, who we are and what we do, so you know a little bit more about us. We're going to jump into the overview and demo, and Bryce will take you through that portion. We'll specifically focus on the org chart, people directory, and user profiles today. And then we'll wrap up in the last 10 minutes or so with Q&A. So if you do have questions, definitely throw those in the Q&A box. If you're jumping in to let us know where you're at today, definitely throw that in the chat box. But in the Q&A, drop in questions you have so that we have the ability to answer those at the end of our session. And if you see a question that you like, that you maybe also had another question, upvote that so that we know how to prioritize answering those questions. All right. So a little bit more about Axero, a little bit more about who we are, just a quick overview. I know many of you on the call are very familiar with Axero as longtime clients, so thank you for joining us today. Very excited to see all the familiar faces. And then I know that there are quite a few potentially future clients, so thank you for joining us and sharing your time with us today. So Axero, just high level, is we're based in the US. We're out of New York. We have employees all around the world, including, I mentioned I'm in San Diego, Bryce is in Washington State. So we have people all around the world serving our clients globally. Today we have about over 50 people on the team. So we're continuing to grow, but we're a tight-knit, very close team that everybody on the Axera team feels like client success is part of their core job. We have over 6 million users all around the world, people in different organizations using our platform to do things like we're talking about today, like connecting people in teams and targeting communications and sharing knowledge all in a digital workplace with the Axera platform. So our primary focus and purpose with the Axera platform is really to distribute knowledge in a targeted and personalized way to unite your people and employees and increase efficiency. So that's part of what you'll get to see today as we dive in. All right. I'm going to go ahead and tag Bryce on this to hand it over. So Bryce is going to jump into our next steps together.
Thanks, Nicole. With that, why don't we get started? Well, I want to expand first a little bit on the introduction to give you some sort of idea of the origin story of this webinar, a potential webinar series. As you can imagine, being involved in the social internet world, we get asked a lot of times about best practices around all sorts of different topics. And what we're doing with this webinar in particular is exploring the potential of a regular series of these. So if you find this one useful, or if you don't, or in any case want to see more of them, please let us know. That'll encourage us to continue this series into the future. This one in particular, we're going to be talking about, as Nicole indicated, some of the best practices around team building, trust building, connecting people together for more effective work. Just as a sort of introduction to that concept, let's talk about, and so make sure we're on the same page about what that means. Just what are the benefits of connected teams? And there's a lot of buzzwords and everything, but when it comes to connections, there's synergy and collaboration, and work harder, work smarter and not harder. All these different ways and goals that you might have in this area. There's also a lot of talk, particularly in the news and whatnot, about how to motivate and keep particularly younger employees engaged in your organization. And that's some of the stuff that we're going to be talking about here. So what are, I mean, just to go over some of the basics again, what are some of the values of connected teams? And these are probably pretty obvious to most people. There's the simplest level is just productivity and efficiency. If I have an understanding of who is on my team and what they're capable of, it makes it easier to get things done. Same thing, if I'm aligned with my team, if we have an understanding of what our goals are, we can get more done that way as well. So there's these benefits. There's also the potential of reducing risk of redundant work. So if I have an understanding of what other people are doing, I can, there's two people are going to be doing the same thing. But just as importantly, and some of the stuff that we're going to be talking about today is this around the topic of trust. I think a lot of times in a lot of organizations, certainly the ones I've been involved in before Axera, you'll have people doing redundant work just because they don't trust the people that they're working with to do it. So there's some redundant work that happens because of lack of trust. And so a lot of what we talk about here today is going to be talking about that trust element. Department silos, this concept that if I want help on something, I need to talk to my boss talks to another boss, who then finds the person underneath in their silo to get things done. The purpose of this is to streamline that. So how can we, through understanding who people are in an organization, get better access to better information? Some of this comes down to organic knowledge sharing as well. How does information flow within your organization? to some extent, you can achieve sort of the ideal where I go online and I find the answer. That's not always possible. And so that's where connected teams come in. If I understand, all right, I can't find the information, but I know exactly where to go to get it in one step, that's going to streamline your process quite a bit. This next item down here, elevated company culture is what I was talking about earlier. This idea that by creating a connected culture where people feel a connection with the people they work with, you're going to achieve a number of different benefits. Energy level is going to go up, and greater retention. If the people feel like they're part of something, and just as important, their work is important to that, then you're going to have a higher energy level. The other part of this, I think, is very relevant to what we hear a lot about in the news about particularly the younger generations, this sense of connection. You can certainly connect, the leadership can connect, and I'll be talking about that a little bit. But I think just as important to this is this idea of connecting to your team and other people in the organization. A lot of times you see people, well, I don't, things are a little rough right now, but I don't want to, I mean, I've got my buddy here and I really enjoy working with these people that I'm working with. We'll get through it. So it adds a layer of buffer, if you will, if you have a strong team, right? So these are people that I don't want to leave. I don't want to miss working with them every day. And that can provide a lot of benefits to your organizations. And I think to a large extent, this last bullet is a repeat. This idea that you're connected to the goal, something that you could take pride in. It's always been interesting to me. I mean, there's obviously some goals that are easy to take pride, easier to take pride in, natural to take pride in. You know, there's a lot of good causes around improving your environmental impact, for example, to an organization. But I've always found it interesting how readily people take pride in a team exercise, even if it's just, hey, we're going to make this company great. We're going to make profits great, even something like that. Some of the signs you might see of a connected team, these are, again, pretty obvious stuff. Laughing. If people are having fun at work, that's a really good sign, I think. Gone are the days where I think that people would look at that as wasteful. I think laughing at work is a particularly good sign in almost all situations. If people are meeting outside of work, that's great as well. I mean, you've made that connection. You've got these teams. You've got that cultural aspect that you're looking for, where people are going to want to stick together, and that's going to just improve your retention and reduce those costs. Asking questions, you know, if people are asking each other questions, interested in each other, not only personally, but then also professionally, that's a good sign that you have connected teams. Then you start getting into the big ones, you know, the real payoff of connected teams. And when you start getting people who say, hey, I'll do that. I can do that. I can help with that. And that's the goal, right? That's what you're trying to achieve. You're trying to get people to engage, to volunteer, to be part of the organization. That's when you can really tell that you've achieved your goal. Constructive suggestions is very much closely related to that. One of my personal pet peeves is someone who complains about something without making a suggestion. The constructive suggestions are the real big ones, where they say, hey, there's this problem. We could do it this other way instead. Solve the problem. That's just amazing when you have a team that starts making those suggestions. Anyway, so there's a brief background. Let's talk more about some of the best practices around the teams, and start with some basics. Visualizing your team. All right, so you're trying to get a sense of who the people are from a very basic level up, right? So one tool for this would be like the org chart, right? So you can do just a very simple introduction, right? So that's one purpose it serves. It's also very useful for practical matters, right? So it gives you a sense of the HR structure. Who reports from who's going to give you your final review, who's going to make those decisions, who do I need to talk to if I have a problem with them, worst case scenario. That's what an org chart is really useful for. It's also typically in this day and age, since org charts generally have pictures, useful for and people new to the organization to familiarize themselves with faces so that they recognize and put a name to a face and whatnot. So best practices, and let's get into this. Again, like any best practice, and I'll make this emphasis early on and try not to repeat it over and over, but it's worth saying once. This idea that best practices are just that. They're suggestions, recommendations, not one size fits all, but certainly something worth considering when you're starting out on this stuff. When it comes to org charts, my first rule is keep it simple and clean, right? So keep in mind that in almost all cases, your org chart is serving very simple purposes. Getting the HR structure across and familiarity with faces and where they fit basically within the organization. Don't want to complicate this. You don't want, most of us probably are used to seeing a lot of these flow charts. And the flow charts can get pretty complicated where dots and lines are all over the place. You want to try to avoid that with an org chart. Keep it simple. Try to avoid the temptation to draw dotted lines between people. If, in fact, we'll get into this, if you are designing connected teams properly, you'll have all lines all over the place. You'll have people talking to all people all over the place at different projects, and trying to represent that on the org chart just isn't the right place for it. Let's just pop over to give you a nice idea of what a simple org chart might look like. You can drill in to different parts. You can start, depending on what your goal is, start on a particular node. But there's all sorts of best practices. People ask us about org charts. This is a more of a vertical look of an organization. You can do horizontal as well. Frankly, that's a personal preference for the organization. Depends on how you're organized and the best way to view that. The other point is whether or not you include a little biopic. I like the quick access myself, but these are all down to personal preferences, and there's not necessarily a best practice around that. This stuff is typically, I would recommend that you tailor this to your organization. At Xero, we tend to use a pretty generic starter point for what you put here, but presumably within whatever you're using for org charts, you would be able to tailor that. That's something up for you guys to decide how exactly you want to do that. There are, however, when we talk about more complex stuff, right? So if I want to get to understand more about the detail of people, if I want to understand how they fit, if I understand those dotted lines, we'll get back to that. There are better tools. The org chart, best to keep it focused on what it's doing. You can go to a people directory, and we'll talk more about people directory best practices here in a minute. People directory is good for understanding people, right, in depth. It's your depth view of what an organization looks like. It's also sort of a single place to look for detailed information about who the person is, and make sure that's the right person to get the issue resolved for you. There's also a concept of team pages. This is that dotted lines concept that I talked about. The ability to see who all is involved in a particular project, and what am I going to do with that. The hover cards, so you can hover over someone and learn more about them. I'll show that in a minute. Don't want to show it with me. Got better examples. And then, of course, the full profiles behind them. So these are all things that we'll talk about in a minute. Let's go into this concept of building trust. I say it's a key, but it's almost probably the key to any sort of connected teams that you're trying to achieve. Particularly this day and age, we all know it, that trust is is sort of in a decline, at least publicly. And it's such a key element to being able to understand, to work with other people in an organization. That's your leaders, your coworkers, and the resources that you're using to do your job. So on a simple level, I think most of us understand the concept of trusting leadership and what it means. And we all work in organizations, right? So we understand what it means. Most of us have experience in organizations where we don't trust leadership, and experience, hopefully, in organizations where you do, and you can recognize the difference, and you can recognize what makes up the difference. The leadership has to be listening, right? So if it seems like the communication is going one way, down instead of both ways, it makes a big difference. And creating an inclusive organization, so everyone has a voice and everyone has an opportunity to achieve their personal goals as well as the organization's goals. Basic stuff. Moving down into the personal connections, and this is more about team members being able to trust each other and developing that real connection. This is where you can do a lot of interesting things with your profile, being able to tell some interesting story, being able to indicate that they're interesting stories, and then being able to have opportunities to share those interesting stories, what people have done, what people are interested in. And at the heart of this is creating profiles that go beyond what you may have in Active Directory or Okta. Wherever you might be using it the same platform for profiles throughout, but a lot of organizations will be using these other places. Be conscious of what other questions you ask in these profiles to give people an opportunity to connect. The other opportunity to connect is really simple. It's replacing the old water cooler where people might gather might have gathered in the past. I don't know how often this happens today, to talk about what they did over the weekend, what they're going to be doing over the weekend, latest sporting events. A lot of talk about the weather, I imagine, but also pets and family and that kind of stuff. And so you can do this digitally. Obviously, you can create a space where people feel comfortable talking about what they've done and what they're interested in, what they're excited about doing coming up. So there's a digital equivalency that you can achieve that helps people connect personally, right? So this is more about the personal connection. We'll be talking about the professional connection later. Same sort of thing with photos. Giving people an opportunity to share directly on the wall or through some photo albums, digital photo albums, what they've done on the weekend, if they went on vacation, that sort of thing. Help people connect and understand each other at a more personal level, again, to create those connections. Trusting your tools, right? So your online tools particularly, it's worth taking the time to tailor the look and feel, your intranet, all of your tools that you can to your company so that it feels like it's yours, and not something that you're sort of compelled to use because of latest fads and whatnot. Really make it fit within your organization. Same thing with again, we'll say the profile fields. Tailor them to your culture, right? Your organization. So in some organizations, it might be appropriate to ask favorite sport teams, right? In others, it might not. You might not get such a response on that level. And what sports you ask will depend on the culture, right? Is it American football or association football, soccer? So just to give you a sense, at Xero, on our solution, we provide out of the box a pretty basic set of profile fields with the expectation that our clients will be adding their own fields to that because it's pretty simple to do. Access to information, right? So this is where trust goes both ways. The more you can provide access and quick access to information, the more efficient you are. This is obvious stuff. But you can't do that unless you trust the people that work for you and with you. And some of this is clearly dependent upon the organization, the nature of information that you're gathering, but culture as well, right? So as you can imagine, at Xero, we deal with a lot of very sensitive information. We have our intellectual property, the stuff related to our platform and how it works, but also to help our clients, we come into contact with their data. And there is nothing within our organization culturally that we have taken more seriously than security. And that's just the sort of thing that you have to do. And it opens doors, right? So once you have established a culture where you can't even mention the possibility of not password protecting this, that, the other thing, or holding onto this sort of data before any longer than you absolutely have to, without being, everyone being on top of you. Once you have that culture, the things start to open up. A small point here: you gotta trust the people that you're working, the third parties that you're working with. The main tools that you're doing with creating these connections, are they with you? Are they on your side? Are they in it with you for the long haul? And that's really the main thing. Will they listen to you just as you want your leaders to listen to you? So let's now get into more of the practical best practices here. And this is where we're going to see some more examples. This idea of professional connections. All right. So now we trust our employees. How do we find the ones that we need to talk to any particular topic? How do we bring together the right team for different projects? So a lot of this comes back to like the complicated, more in-depth tools that I mentioned before. So let's just pop over here real quick to a directory, and this is another opportunity where I talked about earlier, this idea of at Xero, it comes out of the box pretty simple, and we haven't, for the demo even here, I didn't go too crazy with this, but this is where you can and should, as far as best practices go, start thinking about what kind of quick information do people need to know about each person, right? Maybe the location is not important in your case, and you think about how am I going to get depth of information quickly, and then how am I going to filter it appropriately based on information. So then these are basic concepts here, but basically the idea is that if there is sortable information on a profile, right? So you're not going to do a filter based on someone's About Me page, perhaps, but text. But if you're going to look for certain expertise, that might be something useful to think about. So this is where there is some planning that can go ahead of time with regards to finding people through this, but also an evolutionary process. This is a live site, so you have the opportunity to evolve over time and understand how people are looking for each other. There's a certain amount of same sort of philosophy with the org chart. Keep it simple within the context of your purpose, right? So you don't want to overcomplicate these things, but at the same time, design it for purpose. And then, so the other way to connect and dive into the different people is the simple fact that your content is going to be signed, right? So you have an indication so you get a sense. So this Brett character knows a thing or two about spreadsheets, right? And same thing with this hover card. Design it to provide just the right information generally, right? And there's always the chance you can click through and look in more detail at their profile and get to know them a little bit better, find out a little bit more about what they've done, and start to get a real sense of their expertise in this, right? So confirmed, this guy knows a thing or two about spreadsheets. So there's an opportunity here to drill down, and this is what sort of the tools that I was talking about earlier. This concept of the right tools to find out more depth. The other part of this, of course, if you don't have the content in there for individuals, you don't have the content signed by individuals. And it's easy enough for people who are just naturally outgoing and naturally interested in contributing, particularly written, right? Because there's a different skill set, written versus spoken. How do you get the other people involved? How do you get them engaged so that they have greater fulfillment, but also you're connecting better, right? There are, and this comes back to the best practices, there are ways to focus, particularly on those sorts of individuals, just lighter ways to contribute, right? So they might not be writing a blog post or an article about any particular topic, but certainly can contribute comments or wall posts if they're in a group. So just lighter ways, and this is particularly true for mobile use cases. You're not going to necessarily want to write a full-length article while on the bus. Maybe some will, but most people probably wouldn't. But a comment, I certainly would feel comfortable writing a quick comment. Throw some emoticons in for for flavor, and take it from there. So these are light ways to start getting people engaged, and then encourage, right? So if you see somebody who is new to engagement, just jump right in there and support that. Your own comments, certainly, but likes as well, right? So I think one of the clear lessons we've learned for social media is that people respond to these feedbacks, right? And in the case of an organization, it's I think much more positive than some of the stuff that happens in social media. But you can definitely encourage the sorts of behaviors that you're looking for with simple things like liking people for doing what they have done, just naturally. Related to this is this idea of connection, sort of the badge concept. So I've done something, someone has done something that I felt was particularly noteworthy, I might grant them a particular badge for that. So an excellence badge, or we have, as you might expect from my previous story, a security badge at Xero. So, hey, you got it. You got it. You figured out that we don't mess around with security. And so we have our security badge. Hey, you've paid attention to this. Obviously, very much a client or focused organization too. So we have our badge for people who go out and go above and beyond for our clients. So recognition, so and it's two-sided, right? So this is just an example from this demo database that we're looking at here, but you have a history of who has received it, what it's about, why they've received it. And so you get the initial feedback from the receiving it, but then you can also see, all right, so now who keeps receiving it, who keeps sending it. This is something, talking about best practices, this is something that we do quarterly at Xero. We say, all right, who's been receiving the most badges, but just as relevant, and interesting to a certain extent, who's been recognizing, right? So we recognize the recognizers, if you will. And I think that's an important part of the culture of encouraging certain behaviors that you're trying to end up with. In terms of drawing people out, well, I think we're all familiar with mentions. I won't show an example of that, but if you mention somebody in a wall post or a piece of content, it says, "Hey, you in particular, I want to hear from." It's a way to draw people out, particularly if you can explain, why in particular, in case there's any doubt about that, why that might be, so that I'm not being called out, I'm being called on for my particular value to the organization. One of the things that I would say, but others might vary. I would say try to make it more about individual milestones instead of competition. Don't make it about the number of badges that who has won the most badges in all time, because that just favors the people who've been around the longest time. Make it about personal milestones and what a particular individual might have done. That's just my personal take on that. So then we get now finally to the big payoff, right? So this is where we start talking about building teams, the sub teams, the project teams, if you will. This is where everything that we've talked about comes together. There's a lot of benefit along the way. I don't want to make this all about the sub teams, because obviously there's a lot of cultural benefits. We talked about retention already, but when you're talking about building a project and building a new team, this is where the trust comes in. This is where the understanding who people are, so you get the right people involved right away. This is where it all pays off. If you can get your new team off and running on a new project very quickly without stalling, that's where it pays off. So the first step, obviously, and this is getting people together. We talked about profiles and the ability to find people based on profiles. I think we talked about that, so it's pretty straightforward. Finding the right filter tools to find who you're looking for, and making sure in the first place that the information is there for these people. The next thing here, you have personas. It's sort of a technical term. This idea of creating a profile to so let's say you are going to be doing some financial projects. You want your spreadsheet guy, so you bring bread into this, and you may have other conditions in here. And just as an example, so and you're doing the financial report writing, right? So based on these other conditions, and I don't know, whatever else you need for financial reporting, you're going to bring in, you can build your team directly in a tool like this. That sort of thing. This is sort of the automation side of profiles, if you will. So there's opportunities in there. And so once you've built the team and got everyone to recognize who's part of the team, the next challenge is how you're focusing that work. How are you organizing that work together? We call them spaces, but project communities, sub communities, whatever you want to call them, are a good way to do that. It helps provide a single place for what's going on within that team, and then the activity stream around that, right? So not quite sure what happened to that image. Kind of embarrassing, but live demos, that's what's going to happen. So imagine you have some somewhat familiar topic to me recently, some team creating preparing for a webinar that they're doing. You might have a great deal of activity going on in here. And this is what I'm talking about when we talk about comments, right? So you might have individuals who are not so active otherwise, but they can ask questions and get engaged in the comments for a particular piece of content. If you're talking about the outline or if you're talking about, even if you had a discussion about, or what are we going to call this thing, or what's the main focus of it. The point here is that the activity stream, the space, if you will, gives you a focus of what you're going to be talking about. And so the next part of this, and I think this comes back to creating a certain loop of energy and information sharing, and so that sort of culture is publicity for what a project is doing. Absolutely not appropriate in all cases. I will certainly make that point. But when it is, I think it's fun to do, particularly when the team is working well and has some interesting things to talk about. Think about creating an update page for them. Usually it's just a page, but it can certainly be more. So that other people in the organization can see what's going on. And it opens up a lot of, it's a cultural thing, but also if there's somebody who has an opportunity to share in that project, it opens that door. So there's all sorts of, this is completely open to how you design this, but you have, this is just one that our team put together as an example of, hey, we've got this webinar coming up. The rest of the organization might be keen to understand how is it coming along. Are we going to be ready? It's next week. What are we going to do about it? Are we in good shape? So this is a chance for the entire organization to engage in your project and understand what people are doing and understand the progress that they're making over time for it. So this concept, I think, of creating team projects is something worth considering because, and this is as we wind down here, a very excellent point, I think, to end up on is this feedback loop of encouragement. So if I do something and I get encouraged for it, not only am I going to do it again, presumably and hopefully, I'm going to start picking up this idea of encouraging others. And so you create a culture of encouragement where people feel valued, right? And that's what it's all about. Keeping people retained is that, I'm doing something and I'm a part of an organization that is important and where I feel important to it as well. So that does leave us a good amount of time for some good Q&A. So for this, I will kick it back to Nicole to organize.
Wonderful. Thank you, Bryce. Yeah, we did have quite a few questions come in. So thank you, Bryce, for talking us through all of that. And I saw quite a few questions coming in as you were jumping around the site. So lots of interest here. So a couple of the questions we did answer, but just to make sure, in case you didn't see in the Q&A, there were a couple of questions about org chart and people directory. One being is are there different layout options for the org chart? And Bryce, you did mention you showed the horizontal layout. We also have a vertical layout. So you have that option to switch between whichever one your organization prefers. One of the other questions was about can we migrate employee data from single sign-on into Axero for the org chart? And maybe, Bryce, you can give a little bit of detail on this of what is best practice about migrating that data from single sign-on for org chart, user profiles?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there's two different concepts here, actually. There's migration and there's syncing, right? So migration would be, we're going to leave behind the other platform, whereas syncing is we're going to bring information regularly from the other source. The most common use case is syncing. Migration, usually you're not leaving behind your primary HR or single sign-on application, one login, Azure AD, that kind of thing. but you're syncing. So you have a certain amount of information that you store within that you're bringing over regularly. And this is commonly done. It's, I don't know, probably well over half of our clients who are doing this sort of syncing on all sorts of different platforms. So it's really very commonly done. And once synced into the Xero platform, it all shows up on the org chart as you design it, whatever detail you want to show there, as well as the profiles and people directory lists.
And then the kind of second part to that is about, should we allow users to edit that information once it is syncing over? Should we allow editing or disable, or is that even an option in the Xero platform?
Yeah, well, let's talk about best practices first. Absolutely. Okay, so I say absolutely. Typically, you would not. There are certain data points that you would not have users edit, right? So their supervising structure, for example, hire date. These are stuff that you want fixed, right? Static. So your third-party source, your single sign-on platform is going to be your primary source. Might be coming from HR actually, and in that case, you don't want folks editing those fields. There are, in addition to that, fields that you may have unique to your social internet platform, right? So you might not be storing a person's favorite sports team in your Okta or OneLogin, but instead having that only available within your platform. So that's one side of it. Don't want to dwell too much because on the technical details of Xero, but long story short on that is that yes, it is possible to specify some fields as uneditable on for users. There's a couple different ways this can be done. Just really quick, you can simply not show it on the edit form, or you can make it uneditable to them. My instinct is not showing it at all is better. Why bother them if they can't edit it? But there are different use cases that involve different things.
Yeah, so an example might be, I just jumped to Bryce's profile and maybe the hire date is something that you only want to show to admins or maybe HR people. But that's something that you can choose to show or not. And then you can also make it where Bryce can't go into the Xero platform and edit his own hire date because the source of record is coming from your single sign-in tool, for example. Another question was, is it possible to make some fields hidden? And I think that's what you were just talking about, but the HR team was looking for a feature to hide. So that's where you were just saying that is possible in the Xero platform. So make sure that the platform that you are evaluating, if that is a feature that's important and a requirement for you all, make sure that that is something that you are considering when you do evaluate different platforms. Let's jump over to the people directory because there was a question about the filters. So I know, Bryce, you showed this a little bit ago, but the question was, can we adjust the filters for the people directory if we want to show other fields? So in this example, we just have first name, last name, department, occupation, expertise. But the question is, can we adjust these filters?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is really key to the best practices that I talked about. You want to be able to create a tool where the information you've entered is accessible, right? There are practical limitations, right? I talked about this. Certain types of tools lend themselves better to filter, right? So you don't filter an about me text, but you can certainly filter by title, right? This makes sense. And basically, your objective should be here, and it's true in Xero, any field that you're gathering information on that is well designed for filtering should be available for filtering.
And a follow-up to that is if they have unique fields that are coming over from, say it's Okta as their single sign-on tool, or whichever single sign-on tool you all use, is it possible to add those unique fields to our user profiles and then filter by them?
Yeah, absolutely. The only limitations on that, we certainly have examples of single sign-on systems where we are syncing custom fields. It's really a matter of how that the third party works. If there's no limitations, we've just certainly done it with a number of different platforms from Xero. It depends on what they have available and how you're accessing single sign-on. Without going into a lot of technical details about single sign-on, there's different ways syncing happens, and some are more limited than others. But generally speaking, there's a way to get that information. And obviously, any field you want to add to Xero, that's fine. There's no limitation on that. It's just a matter of whether or not the information will sync, and that depends on the third party more than us.
Another question is about the org chart. So let's go ahead and jump to the org chart just to have a visual as we talk through this. And a quick example of editing this is just adjusting it to my screen view right now. I'm going to quickly make some spacing changes. But the question is around the org chart being limitless in how it grows.
Yeah, well, I mean, this goes back to my point about keeping it simple, right? And the I mean, if you start clicking around, if you take a look at Raymond Flores, you'll see that the org chart expands. If you take a look now at Edith, not a good example. I think Jake has a few more items in there. Oh, nope, I was wrong. I don't know my org chart. I don't know my people in my organization so well. There's some more growth. So you'll see that it expands and contracts. The other part about this is that you can start at a particular node, based on a profile. So if you click, you're on Tyler now. If you click to view his profile, the view profile button, and then click back to org chart from there, you can see more of a centralized view of that. So that's another way to simplify the, depending on your objective, right? So if you're trying to get a sense of the large scale of an organization, you keep dragging and you keep opening nodes and expanding it out. If you want to get a sense of where one person fits in, you can get a simplified view. Yeah, these org charts can get a little complicated. So it is nice to have something that grows organically like this.
And it looks like, so you mentioned we just jumped to the profile. So launching from the org chart to the profile, I think you had mentioned this earlier when we were looking at the org chart is the org chart card on the right-hand side. So you can add whichever details that you want to show on this. You can personalize that so that when I'm clicked into Tyler, it's showing some more details, but it's also giving me this quick link to jump over to view more about Tyler.
Yeah, I think if you, just as an example, I think if you click up to Edith, we got better insight in what that's about. And this is, like I said, out of the box, this is, we keep this very simple because we have no guess on, I mean, all organizations we think should have a pretty tailored view on this. But basically any field that you have in your system, you just show here as well as a quick view. I always suggest to keep it simple principle, but there are things that are going to make more sense for you guys.
Mm-hmm. And then another question came in about how do you manage the search terms that people are using?
Okay,
Is there a way
well,
to manage
yeah,
them?
I mean, you sort of get, I mean, I don't, in the context of people, it's one thing, and in the context of content, it's another thing. But certainly, to a certain extent, tags are the answer in both cases. If you have a consistent tagging mechanism, you can tag individuals just as you can content, and achieve a certain way. But in the context specifically of people, this is where just being smart about your fields makes a lot of sense, right? So typically search terms would be, well, a certain common use case would be expertise, like the skill sets. And so by creating pick lists for your fields, you're creating the search terms for them automatically. So you can obviously use a keyword search on for the same thing, but if they understand that there's a more tailored tool for it with better results, they're going to go there.
All right. I think that is about time for the last question we had left here. If there are any questions that we weren't able to get to today, we'll definitely follow up with those and make sure that we send out the questions and answers that were asked. Let's jump into just our next steps. For anyone who would like to continue learning more, I'm just going to make this full screen here. If you would like to continue learning more, we'll send out this deck also to all of the attendees. These are all linked, so you can find more resources, more details about each of the capabilities that we covered today. If you would also like to explore more, these links are taking you into our online support community for our clients. So you can view our documentation and our how-to videos and get quick video overviews or read through more documentation to get more in-depth details. But we will send this out as well as the recording for today's webinar. So keep an eye out for the recording and feel free to share that with your colleagues who weren't able to attend today. All right, I think we're right about at time, so let's end on that note. Thank you all so much for joining us today. There were so many participants who came in and shared your time with us today. So thank you for joining us. I hope that you were able to take away some valuable concepts and best practices, as well as get a good idea of some capabilities within the Axero platform. So hopefully you'll be going back and sharing with your teams your ideas on how to build connected teams. If you do have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. info@axerosolutions.com is always a great way to send us questions. There will be a survey as a quick note, just a quick survey at the end of this. It'll pop up on your browser. If you could just take a quick few seconds to leave your feedback. It'll take less than a minute. So if you have less than a minute to share with us, we genuinely appreciate your feedback. And again, thank you for spending your time, sharing your time with us today. All right, everyone, see you on the next webinar with the Axero team. Have a wonderful day.